Spoilers for Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. There is a cliche in movies where, put simply, the characters would greatly benefit from talking to each other. In this scenario, a lot of the conflict comes from not doing so. Usually it's one key detail that could change everything and prevent the party from walking to their doom. This comes in several forms. Sometimes it is baked in as a character growth thing. The character doesn't want to reveal their secret because it would hurt them, or because they choose to be stubborn about it. But other times, the character with the secret does want to tell everyone else about it, but doesn't persist past the first time they get interrupted. There is almost always time to blurt out the truth, and indeed, sometimes these scenarios do involve the truth getting out by hasty admission of fact or intent. Sometimes it turns out that everyone is sympathetic and would have gladly helped if they had known the truth. The Last Wish has a somewhat advanced take on this. Part of this exploration will be a tangent about how the character Death works, because that's part of what elevates this implementation of the scenario as a trope. Death insists that he is literal and not metaphorical, but as a personification of a concept, the way he moves and relates to the characters often is both. He is both a measure of peril, but also only appears when it would be relevant to appear. He stalks Puss throughout, but largely in the way being harassed by an idea does, invisible and almost out of sight, outside of the events that bring it and its concern to the forefront. When he arrives, he is both the fear and the cause of fear, as Puss grapples with attributing it and running from it. Actually, the movie has a couple of these. One is the slightly more common one, and that causes distrust between the characters, but the one with Death is the one that drives most of the plot. When it comes to explaining his motivation, Puss has two problems. One is his pride, something that gets torn down and rebuilt throughout the movie. The other, though, is, how could he? We, the audience, have the audience to describe a work of fiction as having a personification of a force, but in the world of the movie, it is very real to the characters. When he finally tries, it's understood by those he talks to as a normal fear. They do cheat a little bit by forcing the characters to assume he's running away from them because he's pulled off yet another heist despite seeing him change for the better. And while I'd say take points off for that, it isn't entirely unjustified. Because again, it's understandable that considering the hurry they're in, he hasn't been able to communicate that Death appeared to him in person, and probably didn't know they would even be able to see Death. That latter part is interesting because the reveal is saved for the end by having Death only appearing when the others naturally wouldn't be able to see him. You could say that's rather convenient, but it does seem like some care was put into setting up those scenarios in a way that can work. It also makes sense thematically. The manifestation occurs at times when Puss is given reason to think about it. Sometimes it's when he's alone and thus doesn't have anyone to distract him or give him fulfillment. The other is when he is in great danger. At the end, it seems to be triggered by how close he is to not getting his wish. He begins to worry and dwell on it, causing Death to appear again. This time, everyone can see Death, and it serves as a moment that reveals everyone present can finally understand what he's dealing with, and thus see it. In a way, it's part of the lead into confronting it. He didn't wrestle with Death when others were around, both from the distraction but also because he didn't want them to know, so he kept it hidden. It's one thing to say, yeah, everyone thinks about that, and another to really understand what it's like. What seems like a concurrency issue in my description is at least partially because the pace in movies pick up at the end. Yes, it seems like it's all happening at once, and it is, but it makes sense in the movie. There's a few more interesting things about the final battle. One is that ultimately, the others can't help him. The change he needs, the conflict, has to come from himself. The other is that he doesn't win just by being so super strong that he essentially becomes immortal. He wins by being both willing to fight for the life he has, and by admitting he can't win.